I caught my fiancée cheating, but she just laughed and ignored me. I decided to do this audio story. You won't believe what happened when I caught my girlfriend cheating. Seriously, picture this. I walk into the room, already feeling that knot in my stomach, and there she is, not even trying to hide it. And instead of being shocked or guilty, or at least a little embarrassed, she just laughs in my face. I know, it sounds insane, right? But that's exactly how it went down. And trust me, it only gets crazier from here. You're going to want to stick around, because what happened next flipped my entire world upside down. Expanded introduction. So, let me take you back to where this all started. To the beginning of a relationship that to me seemed like it was out of a fairy tale. We met through mutual friends at a party, and from the very first conversation, there was this instant connection. You know that feeling when you just click with someone? That's exactly how it was. We talked for hours that night, about everything from our favorite movies to our craziest dreams for the future. It felt easy, natural, like we were meant to find each other. Fast forward a few weeks, and we were inseparable. We went on adventures, tried new restaurants, and made spontaneous plans just because we wanted to spend as much time together as possible. Our friends would always joke about how we were couple goals, and honestly, it felt like we were. We could talk about anything. Fears, insecurities, hopes, all of it. I mean, we even had those late-night, deep conversations where you talk about the meaning of life and your biggest fears. It felt like the kind of love you see in movies, the kind that makes you believe in happy endings. But as much as things felt perfect, looking back now, I realize that there were some small cracks I chose to ignore. At the time, though, I was so wrapped up in the relationship that I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. The good times were so good that I convinced myself that they outweighed any of the weird moments. For the first 2 years, everything seemed fine, like we were building something real. I felt safe. I trusted her completely, and we even talked about the future together. You know, the usual, getting married someday, buying a house, all that stuff. Then, slowly, things started to change. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't obvious at first. But there were little signs, things I brushed off because I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. It started with her being more protective of her phone. We had always been open with each other about everything, including passwords. I never thought twice about it. But one day she started keeping her phone face down when we were together, or she'd take it with her everywhere, even if we were just watching TV in the living room. At first, I thought, hey, maybe she just wants her space. We all need a little privacy sometimes, right? But as the weeks went on, those little things started adding up. There were more nights when she'd go out with her friends and come back later than usual. Her stories about where she was or who she was with didn't always line up. I found myself making excuses for her, convincing myself that I was just overthinking things. After all, we had this amazing connection, right? There was no way she'd betray me like that. But the more I tried to ignore those gut feelings, the harder they were to push down. I started wondering if I was just being paranoid or if there really was something going on. Love can make you question your own instincts sometimes. You want to believe the best about the person you're with, even when your gut is telling you something isn't right. Expanded rising action. As time went on, those little signs I had been brushing off started to become more noticeable. I remember one time we were out to dinner with some friends, and she kept checking her phone under the table. Normally, she'd leave her phone face up on the table like it was no big deal, but that night it stayed in her lap, buzzing every few minutes. Every time I asked her who it was, she'd just say, "Oh, it's no one. Don't worry about it." And I didn't push. I didn't want to be that paranoid, over-controlling boyfriend, you know. But the thing is, those gut feelings kept creeping in. You know how they say your instincts never lie? Well, mine was screaming at me, but I was so deep in the relationship that I didn't want to acknowledge them. I didn't want to believe that anything was wrong. We'd built this life together, and I wasn't ready to see it all crumble over something I couldn't even prove yet. It was like I was stuck in this limbo, not knowing if I was imagining things or if there was actually something going on. Then came the nights when she'd go out with her friends and come back late, way later than usual. I'd ask how the night went, and her stories just didn't add up. One time, she told me she was going to a club with some friends, but when I checked her social media later that night, there were no pictures, no posts, nothing. It was strange because she always shared everything. She was the type who post selfies and group photos whenever she went out. So why was she so quiet about that night? I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence. Maybe she was too busy having fun to post, right? But then it happened again, and each time her explanations got vaguer. It was always, oh, it was just a quiet night, or we didn't take any pictures this time. But something wasn't sitting right with me. And still, I told myself that I was overreacting. I didn't want to seem insecure or controlling, so I kept it all inside. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Saturday, and she told me she was going to have a girls' night out. You know, dinner and drinks with some of her close friends. I had no reason to doubt her, but that gut feeling, it was stronger than ever. Something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. She seemed distracted, almost nervous when she told me her plans. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I had this overwhelming urge to check up on her. So, I drove past the restaurant she said she was going to. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I needed to trust her, but I couldn't shake the feeling. When I got there, I didn't see her friends' cars. In fact, I didn't see any group of girls at all. What I did see, though, was her car, parked right outside, next to someone else's, and inside the restaurant, through the window there she was, sitting with some guy, laughing, looking all cozy, like they were on a date. I felt my stomach drop. It was like my worst fears were playing out right in front of me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I wanted to storm in there, confront her, demand an explanation. But something held me back. I wasn't ready for the truth. I wasn't ready to shatter the illusion of what I thought we had. So I left. I drove home, my mind racing, my heart pounding. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her? Should I wait? Was there any chance I was wrong? That night, when she came home, she acted like everything was normal. Like she hadn't just been out with some guy instead of her friends. I wanted to ask her right then and there, but the words wouldn't come out. I felt frozen, trapped in my own head, replaying what I had seen over and over again. I wanted so badly for there to be a logical explanation, something that would prove I was just overreacting. But the late-night texts started getting worse. Every time I walked into the room, she'd quickly hide her phone, like she didn't want me to see who she was talking to. It was almost like a game. I'd try to catch her off guard, but she was always one step ahead, making sure I couldn't see the screen. It was frustrating, but still, I didn't say anything. I didn't want to come across as the insecure boyfriend. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Then, one night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had been bottling up my suspicions for so long that they were about to burst out of me. I remember sitting there, watching her laugh at something on her phone, and I just couldn't hold it in any longer. I turned to her, my heart racing, and I asked, "Is there something you're not telling me?" At first, she looked surprised, like she hadn't expected me to say anything. But then she gave me that same, rehearsed answer. "No, everything's fine." Why would you even ask that? But I wasn't convinced. I pressed harder, asking if she had been seeing someone else. Her face changed. She got defensive, telling me I was being paranoid, that I needed to trust her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. I had to know the truth, even if it hurt. So, I did what I never thought I'd do. I started snooping. I went through her phone when she wasn't around, something I never thought I'd resort to. And that's when I found it. The messages, flirty, intimate messages between her and some guy. My heart sank. It was real. Everything I had been dreading, all my worst fears, they were right there in front of me. I felt sick, like the ground had been ripped out from under me. But at the same time, I was almost relieved. Relieved that I wasn't just imagining things. Relieved that my gut had been right all along. Now I had the truth, and it was time to confront her. Expanded climax. The day I finally confronted her felt like I was gearing up for a battle. I remember pacing around the apartment, going over every possible outcome in my head. What if she denied everything? What if she admitted it right away? Part of me was still hoping for some miracle explanation, something that would make all of this just a huge misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had seen the messages. There was no more guessing or speculating. I just had to hear it from her. My heart was racing, my hands were sweaty, and I could feel my chest tighten as the minutes ticked by, waiting for her to come home. Every sound in the house seemed louder, every creak of the floor made me jump. I was on edge, ready to explode with all the emotions I had been bottling up. And when she finally walked through the door, acting like it was just another normal day, I knew this was it. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I stood there, right in the middle of the living room, and just blurted it out. "We need to talk." She froze for a second, sensing that something was off. "What's wrong?" she asked, her face showing a mix of confusion and maybe a little bit of guilt. I didn't waste any time. I laid it all out there, the late nights, the secretive texts, the guy at the restaurant. I told her about everything I had seen, everything I knew. And as I spoke, I could feel the weight of all that frustration and hurt lifting off my chest. It was like finally ripping off a bandage after weeks of pain. And then, the moment I'll never forget, instead of denying it, instead of apologizing or even showing any sign of remorse, she laughed. She actually laughed in my face. I stood there stunned, my mind racing to catch up with what was happening. Was she really laughing at me? At everything we had gone through, everything we had built together? It didn't make any sense. I had braced myself for tears, for anger, for denial, but laughter. That was the last thing I expected. For a second, I thought I was hearing things. I stared at her, waiting for her to realize how absurd this all was, but the laughter continued. She just stood there, shaking her head, like none of this mattered to her, like I was being ridiculous for even confronting her in the first place. And that's when it hit me. The person standing in front of me wasn't the girl I thought I knew. She wasn't the one I had fallen in love with. She was a stranger, someone who didn't care about the hurt she had caused. I remember the room feeling smaller, like the walls were closing in around me. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the heat rising in my face as a mix of anger and heartbreak washed over me. I wanted to scream, to ask her how she could be so cold, so indifferent, but I was too shocked to say anything. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening, but nothing added up. How could she just laugh it off like this? A laughter stung more than any words could have. It was like she was mocking everything we had shared, all the memories, the love, the plans we had made. I had never felt so disrespected, so belittled in my entire life. I kept waiting for her to stop, to realize how hurtful she was being, but it never happened. She just shrugged it off like it was no big deal. At that moment, I felt this overwhelming sense of betrayal, not just because she had cheated, but because she didn't even care enough to apologize, to explain, to try and make things right. It was like she had already moved on, like our relationship had meant nothing to her. And that realization hurt more than the cheating itself. I stood there, staring at her, trying to find the words to say, but nothing came out. What was the point? She wasn't going to listen. She wasn't going to care. I had put my heart and soul into this relationship, and in the end, it was all for nothing. She had already checked out long before I ever confronted her. And that's when I knew it was over. There was no fixing this, no going back. I had been holding on to a version of her that didn't exist anymore, and it was time to let go. I didn't say anything else. I just turned around and walked out of the room, leaving her behind, still laughing. That was the hardest part, walking away without getting any closure, without any answers. But I knew staying there, trying to make sense of it all, would only hurt more. I had to protect myself, my heart, even if it felt like it was shattering into a million pieces. Expanded falling action. After that confrontation, I was left standing in the wreckage of everything I thought I knew. It was like I had been living in this bubble, and with one single laugh, she popped it. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. I couldn't stop thinking about her reaction. I replayed it over and over in my mind. The way she laughed like none of it mattered, like I didn't matter. And every time I thought about it, it stung just a little bit more. I didn't know how to process it. How do you even begin to make sense of something like that? I felt foolish, like I had been played for a fool this whole time. Every memory we had shared, every moment that I had cherished, suddenly felt tainted. It was like the relationship I thought I had never existed. I kept asking myself where I went wrong. Did I miss the signs? Should I have seen it coming? Was there something I could have done to prevent this? Those questions haunted me. I spent sleepless nights scrolling through old photos of us together, reading through old text messages, trying to figure out when things had changed. It was like I was looking for clues to explain why she had done what she did. But no matter how much I looked, the answers weren't there. And honestly, I don't think they ever would be. For the first few days, I isolated myself. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to admit to my friends that the relationship they had all admired had fallen apart in such a terrible way. I felt embarrassed, like I had failed somehow. How could I not see it coming? How could I have been so blind? I avoided my friends' calls and texts, retreating further into my own thoughts, letting the anger and sadness swirl around me like a storm I couldn't escape. Eventually, though, I knew I couldn't keep it all bottled up. I reached out to a few close friends and told them what had happened. To my surprise, they didn't judge me. They didn't tell me I should have seen the signs or that I was stupid for staying with her as long as I did. Instead, they just listened. They let me vent, let me cry, let me get it all out. And that support, it made a world of difference. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that this wasn't my fault. I had loved someone who had chosen to betray me, and that wasn't something I could have controlled. It took a while for those words to really sink in, but when they did, I started to feel a little bit lighter. I realized that I didn't have to carry the weight of her actions on my shoulders. This wasn't about me being not good enough or too trusting. This was about her choices, her actions, and the way she had treated me. Slowly but surely, I started to find my footing again. It wasn't easy. There were still days when I would wake up with a heavy heart, when I would find myself thinking about her laugh and the way it made me feel so small. But those days became fewer and farther between. I started focusing on myself again, on the things that made me happy outside of the relationship. I reconnected with friends, threw myself into work, and started picking up old hobbies I had let fall by the wayside. One thing that really helped was talking to other people who had gone through something similar. When you're in the middle of that kind of heartbreak, it's easy to feel like you're the only one who's ever felt this way. But as I started opening up to others, I realized that I wasn't alone. So many people had been through similar betrayals, and hearing their stories made me feel less isolated. It gave me hope that I could get through this too. The healing process wasn't a straight line. There were good days and bad days. Some days I felt like I was finally moving on, and other days the sadness would creep back in like an unwelcome guest. But over time, I started to realize that it was okay to feel hurt. It was okay to be angry, to feel betrayed. Those emotions were valid, and pretending they didn't exist wasn't going to make them go away. So, I let myself feel everything: the hurt, the anger, the confusion. And slowly, as I worked through those emotions, I found myself growing stronger. I realized that I didn't need her to apologize or explain herself for me to move on. Her reaction said more about her than it did about me. She had shown me who she really was, and I had the power to choose how I responded to that. In the end, I realized that I deserved better. I deserved someone who valued me, someone who wouldn't laugh in the face of my pain. And while it took time, I began to believe that I would find that person someday. But for now, I was focused on healing, on rediscovering myself, and on building a life that made me happy, with or without someone else.